At exactly 10:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, Otis Carter, a 68-year-old black janitor, gently set her mop aside and walked into the Sterling Corporation boardroom without any prior notice. Laughter instantly erupted as Ryan Sterling and his team of wealthy white executives saw her, their presence treating her as nothing more than a mocking joke. "Lost, old lady?" Ryan sneered, his confidence bolstered by his Harvard MBA and his family's illustrious legacy, a perfect facade for his schemes of embezzlement. "Not at all," Otis replied calmly, placing a worn document on the gleaming mahogany table. The laughter abruptly stopped as the leadership team stared at the undeniable evidence before them. The woman they had disregarded for decades was, in fact, the largest shareholder in the company. For over 30 years, they had only seen her as a janitor, but all that time, Otis had quietly observed, taken notes, and patiently waited for this exact moment. Her engineering degree from Howard University may have been forgotten by everyone, but her certificate of company ownership had never gathered dust. Today, with 400 innocent employees facing the unjust threat of being fired, Otis Carter decided to step out from behind her mop and take back the company from the hands of those who had never bothered to see the true worth of the woman behind the janitor's uniform. A small, silent figure working from dawn, before any employees even set foot in the office. That was Otis Carter, a 68-year-old black woman who had been devoted to the company for more than 3 decades. She carried with her a mop, worn by years of use, a face full of wrinkles, but eyes that still shone with incredible strength and resilience. Time seemed unable to diminish the quiet pride within this woman, even though she had always lived in invisible shadows. Every day, Otis meticulously cleaned every corner of the office, every meeting room, and every glass wall. No speck of dust escaped her watchful eye. But there was one thing she understood more than anyone. No matter how dedicated she was, in the eyes of the powerful people here, she was always just an old black janitor. Nothing more, nothing less. That morning, as she cleaned the office of CEO Ryan Sterling, Otis overheard the sound of swift, cold footsteps in the hallway. The door suddenly swung open, and Ryan Sterling entered with his assistant, Logan Matthews, his gaze condescending as he looked at her like an inanimate object. "Here again? Can you hurry up next time? I don't like your presence disturbing my creative work," Ryan said, his tone arrogant and mocking. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I apologize for the inconvenience," Otis replied softly but firmly, holding back the familiar feeling of hurt she had endured day after day. Ryan turned to Logan, his gaze cold and ruthless. "Check the payroll again. I don't understand why we keep people like this. An old, frail woman whose salary and benefits are higher than even outsourced services." Logan sneered. "Must be his charity, left over from his dad. He always liked to play the good guy." Both of them laughed derisively before turning to leave the room, not caring at all for the woman standing there. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Otis in the deep loneliness. She stood still, her hands still gripping the mop handle, her breath trembling in her chest. In truth, Otis had long been accustomed to such indifference and disdain. For 30 years, she had witnessed countless cold glares, such mocking words from the arrogant, wealthy leaders here. But today, something within her stirred, stronger than ever before. She looked up at the large portrait hanging in Ryan's office, a picture of the Sterling father and son, Thomas Sterling with his arm around Ryan, both smiling brightly. In that moment, memories flooded back, and she remembered the kind man from years ago, Thomas Sterling, the founder of the company, who she had once regarded as a kindred spirit, a brother, the man who had helped her build the company from the ground up, the man who always told her, "Otis, one day people will know you as I do. They will see the amazing person that I see." The promise from that day still echoed, still lived fiercely within this small woman, buried in silence for too long. Her gaze shifted from the memory to the present, growing sharp and full of resolve. Otis Carter suddenly realized that she could no longer allow the truth to remain in the shadows, that these years of quiet endurance could not continue any longer. Outside the glass doors, employees began to fill the office. Otis quietly bent down to continue cleaning, but for the first time in over 30 years, she no longer felt invisible or weak. Inside her, a fierce flame burned, a determination to change everything, to reclaim justice for herself and the hundreds of people who had been unjustly treated here. That day, Otis Carter, the woman who seemed invisible, decided it was time to step out of the shadows and speak up for the values she had silently upheld all these years. It was time for everyone to know who she truly was and the great secret she had kept hidden all this time. And when that day arrived, Sterling Corporation would never be the same again. As the afternoon faded, the pale sunlight filtered through the large glass windows, casting faint streaks of light onto Otis's tired face. After the condescending encounter with Ryan Sterling, she returned to the small room in the basement where she had rested every day for the past 30 years of working at Sterling Corporation. The room was cramped and simple, with only an old wooden chair, a few shelves cluttered with cleaning supplies, but it was the only place where she felt safe and truly herself. She sat down in the chair, her eyes slowly drifting toward the old metal cabinet pressed against the wall. Her hand trembled slightly as she unlocked the cabinet. Inside, beside the cleaning tools, was an old leather briefcase with worn corners. She carefully pulled it out, placed it on her lap, and gently unlocked it. Inside the briefcase were stacks of papers, carefully preserved in moisture-proof plastic sleeves, still intact as they had been on the first day. Otis lifted a yellowed piece of paper, her eyes focusing intently on the clearly typed words. Share Certificate, Sterling Corporation. Major Shareholder, Otis Carter. Ownership percentage, 51%. Signed beneath it was the name Thomas Sterling, the father of the arrogant young man who had humiliated her earlier that morning. Her fingers lightly traced the lines of text, her heart pounding in her chest. The deep memories she had always tried to bury suddenly sprang to life. It was the summer of 1988, in a small room on the outskirts of the city. Otis Carter had just graduated with honors in mechanical engineering from Howard University, one of the prestigious schools for African Americans. But that pride quickly faded when she stepped into the workforce, a world full of prejudice, where gender and race became insurmountable barriers. She had knocked on the doors of dozens of companies, only to be met with skeptical glances or cold rejections. Until one day she met Thomas Sterling, a young and ambitious engineer. Thomas, who was struggling to build his own company due to lack of capital and difficulties with complex designs, had recognized Otis's genius when she swiftly fixed technical issues that had taken him months to resolve. They then decided to collaborate, starting Sterling Corporation from scratch. Jan Thomas was the public representative because they both knew that, at that time, society would never accept a black woman standing equal to a white man in the tech industry. Otis agreed to remain in the background, taking the role of chief engineer, both advising on technical matters and contributing her modest but precious savings, $30,000, all the money she had saved to open her own small shop. From the beginning, Thomas Sterling always treated her as an equal partner. One late evening, while working in the workshop, Thomas had looked at her with sincere eyes and said, "Otis, this society is unfair, but I promise one day everyone will know that you are the true soul of this company. What you've contributed deserves to be recognized." But fate was harsher than they had anticipated. Just a few years after Sterling Corp became a tremendous success, Thomas suddenly died of a heart attack. At that time, Ryan Sterling, Thomas's only son, was still young and ambitious. Otis decided to remain silent, keeping her promise to Thomas and silently protecting the company. But she never imagined that her silence would become the reason for the injustices to come. Ryan grew up in wealth and privilege, quickly forgetting the values his father had upheld. He turned Sterling Corp into a tool for his own gain and for the benefit of his greedy associates, disregarding lower-level employees, especially people of color and women. Otis watched in pain as the company she co-founded became a symbol of greed, injustice, and racism. Although she had many opportunities to step into the light, she hesitated, never feeling the time was right to reveal herself. But now, when Ryan announced his ruthless plan to fire 400 struggling employees just to maintain exorbitant bonuses for the executives, Otis knew she could remain silent no longer. Carefully placing the documents back into the leather briefcase, she took a deep breath, her resolve firm. She knew full well what would happen once the truth was revealed. A fierce battle was sure to erupt. People like Ryan would not easily accept defeat, and she was no longer young enough to fight alone. But inside Otis, the fire of determination burned stronger than ever before. The door to the small room opened again. She stood up, her back straight, and walked outside. Her steps were different today, no longer weary but full of inner strength. She had waited for more than 30 years. Now the time had come. It was time for the world to know the woman who had truly stood behind the success of Sterling Corp, the one who would expose the shadows of injustice and bring justice back to those she had silently protected for over 3 decades. As Otis stepped out of the small room in the basement, her heart felt heavier. Her eyes silently glanced down the hallway, where the sounds of laughter and chatter from the young employees echoed. For over 30 years, she had grown accustomed to being looked through as if she were nothing but an invisible shadow, unworthy of attention. Otis slowly moved into the main corridor, gently pushing her cleaning cart, avoiding the gazes of the office workers gathered outside the large conference room. But no matter how hard she tried, their disdain always found its way to her in the most painful ways. As she passed a group of young employees chatting, they suddenly stopped, turning to look at her with disdain. A new male employee with an arrogant expression deliberately spoke loudly enough for her to hear. "Hey, I don't get why we still keep old women like her around. She's slow and clumsy, just a waste of money." The whole group laughed out loud, no one showing any sign of hesitation or remorse at the cruel words. Otis lowered her head and continued with her work, trying to hide the deep pain behind her calm demeanor. Such insults had become a part of her daily life. There was a time when Patricia Wilson, the senior HR director, a woman who always appeared with an air of sophistication and coldness, publicly mocked Otis in front of many people. "Otis, next time, make sure you use the right cleaner as I requested. The whole office had to suffer from the awful smell you left behind last week." She remained silent, nodding gently, even though she knew she had always used exactly what was asked. But the truth didn't matter. They needed someone to blame, and that person was always her, an old black woman with no right to protest. But among all the people who treated her badly, Ryan Sterling was the one who hurt her the most. Ryan didn't just belittle her, he turned her into a spectacle for the crowd, a way to demonstrate his absolute power. One late afternoon, while Otis was cleaning the restroom reserved for the senior executives, the door suddenly swung open forcefully. Ryan Sterling entered with Logan Matthews and a few other executives. Upon seeing her, Ryan frowned in irritation. "Still not done? How long are we supposed to wait?" Otis tried to respond gently, though her heart was full of unease. "I'm sorry. I'll be done right away." But Ryan didn't let her off so easily. He turned to Logan, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "See? This is the ridiculous charity my old man left behind. This company is beyond saving when it tolerates people like her." Logan sneered, joining in. "Maybe she thinks this is some kind of free retirement home." The whole group burst into loud laughter. Otis lowered her face, her heart tightening. But Ryan wasn't finished yet. His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement as he saw her vulnerability. "Hey, Otis, I think you need to take a good look at yourself. You're old, slow, and still think you have any value here. I'm just waiting for the day you have enough self-respect to disappear from this company." At that moment, everyone in the room laughed thoughtlessly. A few employees from outside curiously walked in to see what was going on, forming a crowd of spectators. Otis stood frozen, her eyes stinging, but she was determined not to let a single tear fall in front of these people. They were not worthy of those tears. After a brief silence, she quietly responded to Ryan, her voice controlled. "Yes, Mr. Sterling? I'll make sure not to disturb you and everyone again." Otis walked out of the restroom, crossing through the crowd of employees standing with pitying and curious looks. She could clearly feel each gaze like a knife wound to her heart, but she kept her back straight, never looking back. In that moment, the invisible wounds she had carried for 30 years seemed almost unbearable. But alongside the pain, a fierce determination began to grow within her. Not only to protect herself, but to defend all the small, invisible people who endured daily injustices just like her. Otis knew it was time to do something, not just to reclaim justice for herself, but to save the soul of the company that she and Thomas had once built together. And that day was coming, closer than ever before. The bathroom door closed softly behind her, but Ryan's cruel words echoed endlessly in Otis's mind. She walked slowly down the hallway, struggling to remain calm, yet her heart felt as though it were being squeezed by an invisible hand. It had been so long since Otis could remember the last time she felt this deeply hurt. She sought refuge in a hidden corner near Ryan's office, leaning against the cold wall, letting out a quiet sigh. Otis's gaze accidentally landed on an old photograph hanging in the hallway, faded by time, capturing the grand opening of the first Sterling Corp office, with the beaming faces of Thomas Sterling and his young son Ryan standing beside him. But few knew that, beyond that frame, she too had been there, standing next to Thomas. It was just that they had intentionally cut her out of every public photo. Thomas had once spoken to her with a sad voice. "Otis, I'm so sorry, but the world isn't ready to recognize your true worth. But I believe that one day things will change." That promise echoed like a haunting specter, tormenting her for over 30 years. Otis vividly remembered Thomas's warm, sincere eyes as he steadfastly added her name to the stock papers with the highest share, 51%, a way for Thomas to ensure that no one could deny her monumental role in building Sterling Corp. But he could never have imagined that after his death, the person to deny her contribution would be his own son. Ryan Sterling, as a child, had once been a well-behaved and respectful boy. Otis had even cared for Ryan, tutoring him through difficult math problems when Thomas was busy with work. But time, money, and power had transformed Ryan into an entirely different person. Otis grieved as she thought about it. The stark contrast between Thomas, a sincere friend, an idealistic man, and Ryan, a son driven by ambition, coldness, and selfishness. The memory of Thomas still felt as fresh as if it had been yesterday. Otis recalled one evening, working together in their small workshop when the company was still in its infancy. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and spoke to her with a tone full of resolve. "We're going to build a company that doesn't just make a profit, Otis. We'll create a place where everyone is respected, treated fairly, no matter their background or skin color." Thomas's promise that day made Otis feel both happy and heartbroken as she reflected on the present. Sterling Corp today bore no resemblance to those noble values. While she stood here, the leaders, those who could never understand the true value of Sterling, were preparing a ruthless plan that would push hundreds of poor people out of the company. Suddenly, the tense voices from Ryan's office broke her from her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Otis unintentionally heard each word through the slightly cracked door as Ryan was speaking with Logan and Patricia. "There's no other way. We have to immediately lay off 400 lower-level employees, mainly from the production and maintenance departments. If we don't, this quarter's profits will drop, and that's unacceptable." Patricia hesitantly asked, "But 400 people? It will greatly affect their lives. Many of them have worked here for years, Ryan." Ryan coldly responded without hesitation, "That's not our problem. They're just tools, and tools can always be replaced. The most important thing is to protect the dividends for the major shareholders, myself included. This decision is non-negotiable." Otis's heart froze as she listened to those casually cruel words. She realized she could wait no longer. Thomas had once hoped, had once placed his trust in her, and now she could no longer stand by and let his legacy be destroyed by his own son. Otis stood up straight, her gaze filled with determination. This was the moment she had been waiting for over 30 years, the moment Thomas had always believed would one day come. She had endured enough invisible wounds. Now she had to step out of the shadows, not only to reclaim her own honor, but also to save the hundreds of innocent lives teetering on the brink of losing everything. That night, in her small room in the basement, Otis meticulously prepared the documents proving her ownership of the shares. Tomorrow, she would no longer be a ghost of the past. Tomorrow, the world would know the truth. The next morning, Sterling Corporation was immersed in an unusually tense atmosphere. Everyone knew that today's board meeting would decide the fate of hundreds of employees, but no one knew that an even bigger surprise was waiting just around the corner. Otis walked slowly down the familiar hallway, but today she was no longer wearing her usual janitor uniform. Instead, she wore a smart suit, an old yet neatly kept jacket she had preserved carefully over the years. Her gaze was firm, and the old leather briefcase containing the stock ownership documents was held tightly to her chest like a precious treasure. Inside the large conference room, the discussion was tense. Ryan Sterling sat at the head of the table, his face cold and authoritative, surrounded by board members, faces that only cared about profits and numbers. Ryan had just finished his chilling speech about the employee layoffs when the door to the meeting room suddenly swung open. All eyes in the room turned toward the door, and when they saw who had entered, the room fell into a silence so thick it was suffocating. Ryan furrowed his brow, his voice dripping with anger mixed with mockery. "What are you doing here, Otis? The bathroom's down the hall. Not in here." A few members of the board chuckled, their eyes filled with derision. But Otis did not flinch. She calmly walked in, moved toward the long conference table, and gently placed the leather briefcase in front of her. "I'm here today, gentlemen, not to clean, but to attend this meeting, as the largest shareholder of Sterling Corporation." The laughter in the room stopped instantly. Ryan leaned back in his chair, folding his arms in a gesture of contempt, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Large shareholder, huh? A janitor? Come on, Otis, I don't have time for your jokes." Otis didn't answer immediately. She calmly opened her briefcase and took out a stack of papers. placing them in front of everyone. Her voice was soft but carried an undeniable authority. "This is the certificate of my 51% ownership, signed by your father, Thomas Sterling, in 1988. I am the co-founder of Sterling Corp. With your father, and all of this is legally documented and filed with the SEC. I'm sure you can recognize your father's signature." The atmosphere in the room suddenly became as taut as a string. A few board members hurriedly picked up the documents, their faces shifting from skepticism to shock. Ryan snatched the papers, his eyes scanning each line angrily, but the more he read, the paler his face became. "No, this can't be," Ryan muttered, his voice faltering in disbelief. Otis continued, her tone calm but firm. "Your father and I agreed that I would remain in the background, working as a janitor to avoid the prejudices of that time. But today, when I see Sterling Corp. Preparing to lay off 400 innocent employees to protect the personal interests of a few greedy shareholders, I can no longer remain silent." Logan Matthews, still skeptical, interrupted. "Even if these papers are real, why did you wait until now to show up? This is highly suspicious." Otis looked straight into Logan's eyes, her gaze sharp, making him fall silent. "I waited because I once trusted that Ryan would inherit the legacy and values that his father left behind. But clearly, I was wrong. Ryan and people like you have turned Sterling Corp. Into a profit-making tool at any cost, disregarding the survival of the vulnerable. I can't let that continue." Ryan shot to his feet, his eyes bloodshot, his voice a furious growl. "You have no right to lecture me. You're just a worthless janitor." Otis responded calmly, her voice ringing clearly, powerfully before the entire board that was witnessing the exchange. "Ryan, I was never worthless. Your father once told me that the true value of a person is not in their title or status. You're the one who has forgotten the true value of yourself and of Sterling Corporation." Ryan opened his mouth to retort, but when the eyes of the entire board turned toward him with suspicion and contempt, he found himself at a loss for words. Patricia Wilson quietly studied the papers, then spoke slowly, breaking the long silence. "These papers, they're completely valid. If this is true, Mrs. Carter is the largest shareholder, and according to the bylaws, she has the power to veto any decision made by the board." The room fell into absolute silence. Each board member turned to look at Otis with a different gaze, one that combined wariness and respect. For the first time in over 3 decades, Otis felt their eyes had truly seen her, truly acknowledged her. Ryan slumped back into his chair, his eyes fixed on the stack of papers in front of him, for the first time feeling a profound sense of helplessness before the woman he had always scorned. The woman who now stood tall in the light, ready to protect the noble values his father had once founded. That day, Sterling Corporation would change forever. The light had finally illuminated the invisible janitor, Otis Carter, who from this moment on would step into the heart of the story. As the door to the boardroom closed behind her, Otis walked calmly down the hallway, but she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger battle ahead. Behind her, in the closed meeting room, Ryan Sterling remained frozen in his chair at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the ownership documents, as if he couldn't believe what had just happened. Otis's unexpected appearance had dealt a heavy blow to his pride and ambition, but she knew well that someone like Ryan would never surrender easily. Indeed, less than 2 hours after Otis declared her 51% ownership of the company and left the boardroom, Ryan immediately called a private meeting with his closest associates. In the luxurious private room at the top floor, he sat, his eyes filled with hatred, his hands trembling with rage. "I can't believe that old woman has been deceiving us for decades." Ryan slammed his hand on the table, his voice growling with anger. "Are you all useless? Why didn't anyone check these share documents earlier?" Logan Matthews sat across from him, pale and uneasy as he tried to explain. "I went through the old files, but indeed, these documents are valid. Your father left everything tightly secured, with clear signatures." Ryan gritted his teeth, his eyes burning with fury, unable to accept the reality that the supreme power at Sterling Corporation, the place he had always believed was his alone, had been taken away by an old poor woman he had always looked down on. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them again with a malicious glint. "If the papers are valid, we'll make them meaningless. I want her to regret ever stepping out of the shadows." The very next day, Ryan began implementing a series of retaliatory measures with swift and overwhelming force. Leveraging his long-standing relationships with banks, he quickly froze all of the company's crucial accounts, citing an internal legal dispute. Salary payments, supplier bills, and even promised pensions, everything was halted. The news spread rapidly, causing panic across departments. Hundreds of employees gathered in the company's lobby, their faces full of worry. The younger employees whispered in confusion, while the older staff, those who had dedicated their lives to Sterling Corp., couldn't hide the fear and panic in their eyes. Amid this chaos, Ryan played another ruthless card. He reached out to a few journalists, secretly feeding them false information to tarnish Otis's reputation in the media. Within a single night, a wave of articles appeared, questioning Otis's background and motivations. Janitor becomes CEO, truth or power, grab scheme. Sterling Corp in crisis. Shareholders doubt the mysterious Otis Carter. These sensational headlines quickly spread across major news websites. Images of Otis, dressed in her old janitor uniform, appeared everywhere, alongside fabricated stories about her allegedly exploiting Thomas Sterling's kindness for personal gain. Ryan knew full well that in the business world, reputation was often more important than money. If he couldn't defeat Otis with paperwork, he would destroy her through public opinion. In her small basement office, Otis sat silently in front of the computer screen, reading the malicious comments, the slander flooding social media. Her fingers clenched tightly together, her heart aching, but her gaze remained firm. She knew she had to stay strong against these attacks, but she also understood that this was just the beginning. The battle escalated further when Ryan used his power to secretly sabotage the company's internal data. One morning, the IT staff discovered that crucial financial records and contract data had mysteriously vanished or been destroyed. Calls and emails flooded Otis's office from partners asking why Sterling Corporation had delayed payments or stopped providing services. At this time, Patricia Wilson, the HR director, who had once sided with Ryan, began to doubt his methods of destroying the company in his quest for power. One late afternoon, she visited Otis's office, her voice trembling with concern. "Otis, I know I haven't treated you well before, but I'm genuinely worried about what's happening. Ryan is destroying the company just to get back at you." Otis looked at Patricia with understanding, her eyes filled with compassion but also with determination. "I understand, Patricia, but I won't give up. I can't let innocent people out there suffer because of Ryan's ambition." Patricia nodded slightly, for the first time feeling the true strength and compassion in Otis. But outside, things continued to worsen. Later that day, when Otis left the office, she was surprised to find a crowd of employees gathered around a large screen in the lobby. On the screen, Ryan appeared at a press conference, his face serious as he loudly declared, Sterling Corporation is in danger due to incompetent internal manipulation. As a former leader of the company, I must warn investors, employees, and customers. Be cautious of the suspicious actions taking place. Otis stood still in the crowd, feeling the eyes of those around her, filled with confusion and doubt, all turned toward her. She understood that this would be a long and challenging fight. But she was determined not to back down, because she knew deep in her heart she was fighting for what was right, for all the innocent people who were looking to her as their last hope. And in that moment, Otis decided that she would not only protect Sterling Corporation, but she would reclaim honor and truth for everyone. No matter how harsh this battle became, she would never allow the darkness to win again. That night, darkness enveloped Sterling Corporation, and the lights in the office gradually flickered out, giving way to the suffocating silence of the night. But deep in the basement, the small room where Otis had spent over 30 years of her life remained illuminated. Sitting quietly at her small desk, Otis focused her eyes on the words on the screen of her old computer, her breath catching as she slowly realized the insidious plot Ryan and his allies were executing behind her back. Financial files, employee records, legal contracts, all the crucial evidence that could expose Ryan's wrongdoing were gradually disappearing or being altered. The digital traces were sophisticated, but Otis knew this was no accident. This was a plan being carried out by the very people she had once considered colleagues, those she had trusted to protect the company and its core values. What hurt the most was that Otis realized she was facing a web of betrayal. Not only Ryan, but also senior employees who had sworn loyalty to Sterling Corp had secretly aligned with him, hoping to reap generous rewards for helping Ryan regain control. This was deeply painful for Otis, as Sterling Corporation had once been a place built by Thomas and herself on mutual trust and loyalty. In the tense silence of the small room, Otis closed her eyes, a bitter sadness creeping into her mind. But just as she felt her resolve weakening, a soft knock at the door broke her thoughts, pulling her back to reality. Jake Wilson, the young accountant she had quietly observed from afar, entered the room. Jake wore a sincere expression, his eyes always bright whenever he spoke of fairness and loyalty to the company. Tonight, his eyes were filled with worry and seriousness, and in his hand was a small USB drive. "Mrs. Carter," Jake said softly but clearly, "I know Ryan's plan. I've been quietly following him and discovered that he's preparing to delete all financial data, erasing the evidence against him. If we don't act tonight, we'll lose everything." Otis looked at Jake intently, and in that moment she understood that amidst the many betrayers, there were still young people like Jake who held fast to the company's ideals. She nodded, her voice firm. "We don't have much time. If Ryan succeeds, not only will this company be destroyed, but hundreds of innocent lives will be ruined. Jake, I need you to help me get those final pieces of evidence." Jake didn't hesitate, his eyes showing a fierce determination. "Let's go now." Close to midnight, with the hallway quiet and only the faint light from security lamps, Otis and Jake hurried through the offices. They quickly reached the central server room, where the most crucial data of Sterling Corp was stored. Jake, with his quick hands and technical knowledge, immediately unlocked the electronic door to the server room. Inside, the servers hummed steadily, with green and red lights flashing like warning signals, making Otis feel more tense than ever. He quickly plugged the USB drive into the central computer and began copying the vital data. Each second seemed to stretch endlessly. Otis stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the screen, praying that everything would go smoothly and quickly. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from afar, growing louder, unmistakably heading their way. Otis's heart raced, and she and Jake exchanged frantic looks. Neither of them had prepared for this. Jake whispered tensely, "Almost done. Just one more minute." The footsteps grew louder, and Logan Matthews' voice called out from just outside the server room door, filled with suspicion. "Who turned on the lights in here? Is someone in the server room?" Otis clenched her hands tightly, her breath growing more frantic. She knew that if they were discovered now, Ryan would have all the reasons he needed to destroy her completely, but she couldn't let these final pieces of evidence fall into his hands. Jake quickly pulled the USB drive from the computer just as the last of the data was transferred, looking around and quickly thinking to pull Otis behind a large server rack. The door swung open just seconds later, and Logan entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Is anyone here?" Logan called out loudly, his voice filled with caution. Jake and Otis stood perfectly still in the darkness, their hearts pounding as if Logan could hear them. Logan slowly circled the room, his eyes never stopping their inspection. He paused right in front of the rack where they were hiding, just steps away from them. A long moment of silence stretched, full of tension. Finally, Logan's phone suddenly buzzed. He frowned and quickly walked out of the room to answer the call, his voice growing quieter as he moved away from the server room. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I'll check immediately." Jake and Otis waited for a few seconds, making sure Logan had gone far enough before daring to step out from their hiding place. They quietly exited the server room, their hearts still racing with tension, but in their hands now were the crucial pieces of evidence, final data that could prove Ryan's criminal actions. In that moment, Otis knew that this battle would not end easily. The traitors were still working in the shadows, but she also knew more than ever that she was no longer alone in this fight. Young people like Jake were standing by her, ready to face every danger alongside her. They had narrowly escaped, but the real battle had just begun. The future of Sterling Corporation, and the innocent people relying on them, stood on the edge of greater danger than ever before. As the darkness slowly receded, the faint light of dawn crept through the windows of Sterling Corporation. After a night of intense tension, Otis sat quietly in the small basement office, her hand still gripping the USB, holding the crucial evidence that would decide the future of the company and the fate of hundreds of innocent people. Beside her, Jake Wilson stood leaning against the wall, his eyes showing clear signs of exhaustion, but also determination. Otis glanced at Jake, noticing the visible traces of a sleepless night etched on his young face. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice deep and filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jake. Without your help, we would have lost our last chance." Jake gave a small smile, his eyes still shining with resolve. "No, Mrs. Carter. The one who should be thanked is me. You've given me the courage to stand up for what's right. You are living proof that justice exists, even if it sometimes needs to fight to be heard." Before Otis could respond, the phone rang, breaking the silence in the room. Otis quickly grabbed the phone, her expression shifting to surprise when she heard the serious voice on the other end. "Mrs. Carter, this is Agent Simmons from the FBI. We've received all the information you provided, and we've confirmed the criminal evidence. In less than an hour, we will begin arresting those involved at Sterling Corporation." Otis breathed a deep sigh of relief, her heart pounding with a powerful beat. For the first time in many years, she felt that justice had truly arrived. At exactly 9 a.m., Sterling Corporation was still shrouded in an atmosphere of tension. Ryan Sterling sat in the top-floor office, smugly sipping his coffee, confident that his plot had succeeded. But that smugness quickly faded when he heard loud noises outside the hallway. The office door suddenly swung open, and Agent Simmons, along with an FBI team, entered with cold, stern expressions, carrying a legal arrest warrant. Ryan jumped to his feet, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. "What are you doing? Who gave you permission to barge in here?" Agent Simmons raised the arrest warrant high, his voice clear and authoritative. "Mr. Ryan Sterling, we have full evidence of financial fraud, data destruction, conspiracy to erase evidence, and witness intimidation. You and your accomplices are under arrest according to federal law. We ask that you cooperate." Ryan immediately recoiled, his face flushed red, a mixture of rage and fear. "This is a smear campaign. You don't know who you're messing with. I'll sue all of you." But Simmons remained unwavering, signaling for his team to move forward and handcuff Ryan in front of the shocked employees gathered outside his office. The faces that had once feared Ryan's arrogance now showed clear astonishment, mixed with an unmistakable sense of hope. At that moment, the FBI agents simultaneously arrested the other accomplices, including Logan Matthews and senior executives who had assisted Ryan in his crimes. Logan was escorted down the hallway, his face pale, no longer holding the arrogant expression he usually wore. When he saw Otis standing silently at the end of the hallway, his eyes reflected a mix of regret and fear. Ryan struggled as he was led past Otis, his eyes sharp as daggers, full of hatred aimed directly at her. He gritted his teeth, his voice low and threatening. "You'll regret this, Otis. I swear I'll make you pay. No one can take Sterling Corp from me. No one." Otis stood there calmly, her eyes filled with unwavering determination as she stared straight at Ryan. In that moment, she felt deeply that this was the price to be paid by those who scorn justice, those who abused power to oppress and trample on others. As the FBI agents led Ryan and his accomplices out, the employees of Sterling Corporation stood frozen, unable to believe what had just happened before their eyes. But then, from the initial shock, applause began to rise. Soft at first, then growing louder, eventually spreading throughout the room like a powerful wave of emotion. Otis looked around, a sense of emotion and relief swelling in her heart. For the first time in over 30 years, she felt the sincere support of the people she had always tried to protect. Now, she was no longer the invisible janitor. Before all the employees, Otis had become a symbol of courage, justice, and truth. Jake walked over to her, a gentle, proud smile on his face. "You did it, Mrs. Carter. Justice has finally spoken." Otis nodded slightly, her eyes filled with a new sense of hope. "Yes, Jake. This isn't just my victory. This is the victory of all those who have been scorned, oppressed, and forgotten. This is the victory of honesty and truth, even though to achieve it, we sometimes have to face the toughest battles." As the applause continued to echo, Otis knew that the battle wasn't fully over. Ryan had sworn revenge, and she understood that he would never easily accept defeat. But today, in this moment, justice had spoken louder and clearer than ever before. And from this moment on, Sterling Corporation would forever change, once again belonging to the values that Thomas and she had always pursued, becoming a place truly deserving of everyone. As the last applause gradually faded away, and the silhouettes of Ryan and his accomplices disappeared behind the police car doors, a deep silence enveloped Sterling Corporation. Otis stood in the grand lobby, her gaze slowly sweeping over the faces of the employees gathered around. In their eyes, she saw relief, but also a trace of doubt and anxiety about the future. She understood that the legal battle had ended, but the fight to rebuild trust and restore Sterling Corp's true values had only just begun. Otis gently stepped forward, her voice soft but full of determination, clearly resonating in the vast space. "I know that over the past few days, everyone has felt confused and fearful. But today, I stand here not just as a major shareholder, but as someone who will take responsibility for guiding Sterling Corp back to the path it should have been on long ago." The crowd fell silent, listening intently. Otis continued, her voice carrying sincere conviction. "We have been through painful events, but now it is time for us to heal those wounds and rebuild this company together. Starting today, Sterling Corporation will no longer be a place of greed or injustice. From now on, this will be a place of fairness, transparency, and respect for every individual, no matter their position." Otis's heartfelt words felt like a breath of fresh air, soothing the tension and fear that had weighed on everyone. The skeptical eyes slowly warmed, filled with hope that the future ahead would be brighter. The next day, Otis officially stepped into her role as CEO of Sterling Corporation in front of all the employees. She quickly called for a full meeting to announce the first significant changes, marking a turning point in the company's history. In the large conference room, Otis sat at the center, surrounded by the remaining senior management and executives after the recent turmoil. She gently began, "To restore Sterling Corp., I believe the first thing we need to do is restore the trust of our employees and partners. Therefore, I will immediately implement some policies to address the consequences of previous mistakes." She looked toward Jake Wilson, now her most trusted assistant, and continued, outlining the points in her plan. "First of all, I am officially announcing the immediate halt of the plan to lay off 400 employees. I understand that Sterling Corp cannot survive if we continue to place short-term gains over the survival of those who have dedicated their lives to this company." As her words echoed through the room, the meeting erupted into applause, the faces that had once been full of worry now shining with joy and emotion. Otis calmly waited for the applause to subside before continuing. "Next, I have ordered an audit of all employee retirement funds, and we will immediately restore any stolen or lost amounts from the past. No employee will suffer due to the wrongdoings of previous leadership." She looked around the room, pausing for a moment to make sure her commitment was clear. In that moment, she noticed some older employees, their eyes filled with emotion. For them, retirement funds were not just assets, but their family's security for the future. Otis continued with certainty and clarity. "Furthermore, starting next week, the working conditions of all employees, especially lower-level staff and maintenance workers, will be significantly improved. I have immediately instructed a 20% increase in the minimum wage, enhanced benefits, and we will create an education and training support fund to help every employee develop their potential, regardless of their starting position." The room was filled with joy and sincere gratitude as they heard these human-centered decisions from Otis. This was the first time in Sterling Corporation's history that the lower-level workers felt truly seen, respected, and given opportunities they had never dared dream of before. After the meeting, Otis took the time to visit each department, personally talking to employees, listening to their concerns, worries, and hopes. Step by step, she began to rebuild a friendly, approachable, and transparent atmosphere within the company. Soon after, news of the reforms at Sterling Corp spread widely across the media. The articles that had once doubted Otis were now replaced with pieces praising the woman who had once been a janitor and was now reviving an entire corporation. The company's reputation in the market was gradually restored, and partners and investors began to return with renewed confidence in Sterling Corp. In the days that followed, Otis and her dedicated team, including Jake, poured their efforts into rebuilding the core values of the company: ethics, transparency, and respect for people. Sterling Corporation slowly transformed into a symbol of a business that was not only financially successful, but also respected for always placing people's interests above all else. One late afternoon, as the sunset cast its glow over Sterling's headquarters, Otis stood by the CEO office window, gazing into the distance. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she also understood clearly that she was no longer alone. Now she had hundreds of employees standing by her, ready to join her in writing a new, brighter chapter for Sterling Corporation. For Otis, the journey of healing had only just begun, but she was certain that the path ahead would be one of justice, trust, and the noble values she and Thomas had nurtured from the very beginning. Just as the glimmer of hope had begun to emerge at Sterling Corporation, dark clouds once again gathered. While Otis was focused on rebuilding trust among the employees, Ryan Sterling, though out on bail awaiting trial, was secretly preparing for a new, more vicious and sophisticated retaliation. Ryan had never been one to submit. For him, being arrested at the Sterling Corp headquarters in front of hundreds of employees was a humiliation that could never be washed away. And now, temporarily free thanks to his power and wealth, he was determined to destroy everything Otis was working so hard to build. From the luxurious apartment where he was under house arrest, Ryan quickly resumed old connections. He arranged a series of secret meetings with major investors, leveraging his long-standing relationships and past hidden interests to slowly sabotage Sterling Corp. In covert meetings at upscale restaurants or private clubs, Ryan spread fabricated accusations about Otis, deliberately sowing confusion and instability. That old woman knows nothing about business. In just a few months, Sterling Corp will collapse completely. Do you want to lose all your investments to someone with no experience, or should we take back this company before it's too late? These distorted words quickly spread through the investment community, throwing Sterling Corp's reputation into another severe crisis. Calls from major shareholders flooded Otis's office, demanding clarification about the company's financial situation and new business plans. Investor confidence wavered once again, putting the company in a difficult position. But Ryan didn't stop there. He cleverly used his media contacts to launch a series of slanderous articles, questioning Otis's leadership abilities. Major media outlets published vicious headlines, casting doubt on her past with malicious intent. Sterling Corporation headed for bankruptcy under janitor turned CEO? Otis Carter, from janitor to saboteur. The negative press was blown up and spread quickly, sowing chaos and confusion throughout Sterling Corp. Each day Otis walked into the office, she had to face the worried looks and whispered doubts from the very people she was working to protect. But the most insidious blow Ryan struck wasn't just the slander or the false articles. One morning, as Otis arrived at the office, she received an urgent call from Jake. His voice was trembling, filled with panic. "Mrs. Carter, all our bank accounts have been frozen again. I just got word. The banks say they've received a legal request from Ryan's lawyers to temporarily suspend all Sterling Corp transactions while the investigation is ongoing." Otis froze, her heart sinking to the depths. She knew full well that once the company's cash flow was frozen, the consequences would be immediate. Employees would not be paid, suppliers would halt transactions, the supply chain would break down, and the entire company's operations would grind to a halt in a matter of days. The news spread quickly, causing unprecedented chaos inside Sterling Corporation. Employees gathered in the hallways and lobby, their faces filled with fear and despair. Once again, they saw their futures and their families' futures in the hands of people driven only by power and personal ambition. Otis stepped into the lobby, trying to maintain her calm in the face of the overwhelming situation. An older employee, his face pale, spoke up in panic. "What are we supposed to do, Mrs. Carter? No pay. How are we supposed to feed our families? You promised things would be okay." Otis's eyes were filled with sorrow. She understood that their panic was entirely justified. Her voice was steady, but full of resolve. "I understand everyone is very worried, but please trust that I will not let any of you suffer again. Ryan is deliberately using this to undermine our confidence, but I will not let him succeed." She turned to Jake, whispering but firm. "We need to meet with the lawyers immediately and contact other major banks to open emergency accounts. In the meantime, I'll use all the personal savings I've accumulated over the years to ensure everyone gets their pay this month. No employee will suffer from Ryan's schemes." That very afternoon, Otis and her trusted team worked tirelessly. They contacted reputable lawyers to combat the illegal legal moves from Ryan's side, while actively working with banks to open emergency accounts to save the company's cash flow. Though the challenges still surrounded them, Otis was ready to fight to the end. She was no longer the invisible janitor of the past. Now, she knew better than anyone that justice and truth could only prevail if she never gave up. From the luxurious apartment where he was staying, Ryan smiled smugly as he received reports about the chaos he had caused. But little did he know that these ruthless tactics were only strengthening Otis's resolve. Amidst the storms surrounding them, she was determined not only to save the company but also to win with integrity, courage, and an unyielding spirit. Ryan had underestimated the power of a woman who had endured decades of being disregarded and oppressed. And now, Otis was determined that, no matter how difficult it became, she would protect Sterling Corporation at all costs, not only for the beloved employees, but to prove one simple, immortal truth: that justice will always be stronger than any conspiracy. The chaos had not yet settled, and the anxiety still lingered on the faces of the employees at Sterling Corporation. But in that darkest moment, Otis realized that this was the time she had to stand stronger than ever before. It was her sincerity and decisiveness that would be the key to restoring trust, which had become fragile after the continuous upheavals. The very next morning, Otis decided to hold an emergency company-wide meeting. News of the meeting quickly spread, and within an hour, hundreds of employees gathered in the large auditorium of the headquarters. All of them wore expressions of confusion and exhaustion, but amidst their anxiety, there was also a quiet glimmer of hope in the woman who had unexpectedly risen from janitor to CEO. Otis stepped up to the podium, her gaze sweeping across the vast auditorium. A profound silence fell over the room as she began to speak. "I know that everyone is scared and uncertain right now. I don't blame any of you for that. I myself have spent many sleepless nights thinking about the future of this company and all of you. But today, I stand before you to say, I will never let Sterling Corp fall. I will never let greed and selfishness defeat us again." Otis's voice was sincere, resolute, and clear in the auditorium. Her eyes shone with a deep belief, a belief not just from reason but from deep within her heart, the heart that had witnessed and endured so much over the past 30 years working as a janitor in this company. She paused for a moment, letting her words truly sink into the souls of everyone present. Then, with a gentle yet powerful tone, she continued, "You may be afraid that the frozen bank accounts will prevent us from paying salaries on time. But today, I assure everyone of one thing. If Sterling Corp cannot use its current funds, I will use my personal assets to ensure that every employee gets paid this month and the next until we overcome this difficult period." A ripple of shock swept through the auditorium at this declaration. A quiet, emotional silence spread, with many employees unable to hold back tears. They realized that this wasn't just an empty promise from a distant CEO. It was a heartfelt commitment from a woman who had lived her entire life in the shadows and understood their struggles more than anyone. Otis could see the emotion on the faces of her employees. She smiled gently, her voice softer now, but still filled with immense strength. I am not an ordinary CEO. I was once a janitor, someone just like many of you, living on meager wages. I understand the worries, the restless nights spent wondering how to provide for your families and children. So, I promise, with everything I have, that Sterling Corp will overcome this crisis with unity and mutual trust. If we stand strong together, no one, not even Ryan Sterling, will be able to destroy this company. Her sincere words hit like a powerful wave, stirring trust and determination in the hearts of everyone. From the initial emotion, a resounding round of applause began to spread throughout the room, quickly turning into cheers of support. After the meeting, something miraculous began to happen. Employees who had once been shy, hesitant, and fearful now stood strong, united in their support of Sterling Corp and their new CEO. They formed small groups, from the low-level workers to the veteran staff, all expressing their strong support for Otis. Banners appeared all over the company with large, clear words, "We trust Otis Carter. Justice will prevail. Sterling Corp belongs to all of us." Within just a few days, this spirit of unity spread beyond Sterling Corp, reaching the community outside. Employees began organizing a large protest, gathering in front of the courthouse where Ryan was being tried, and in front of the major banks that had temporarily frozen the company's accounts. Standing before the doors of Sterling Corp, Otis was moved as she looked at the hundreds of employees, her colleagues standing together, calmly but powerfully expressing their support. Now, not only was Otis fighting for them, but they were also standing by her, fighting for a better and fairer future. In his lavish apartment, where he was under house arrest, Ryan Sterling sat before his TV screen, his face darkening as he watched the scene of the massive protest. He had never imagined that a woman he had once scorned and oppressed could rally an entire corporation and community against him. In that moment, he bitterly realized that he had underestimated the power of trust, that invisible but incredibly strong force that had connected all those he had oppressed over the years. Ryan clenched his fists, his eyes filled with fury and hatred. He understood that this battle would not end as easily as he had thought. But now, he was no longer just facing Otis Carter. He was fighting against hundreds of people, those who were willing to stand up to protect justice, truth, and Sterling Corporation. And in this battle, Ryan began to feel the true fear. The fear of an unstoppable force born from trust, something he had once dismissed. As the wave of support for Otis grew stronger, she suddenly received a special call from Thomas Sterling's longtime attorney, the close friend and partner who had helped her build Sterling Corporation. Her heart skipped a beat when the lawyer informed her that he had just discovered an old letter from Thomas, one that had been kept secret and with strict instructions to only open when the situation became dire. The letter was addressed to Otis, containing Thomas's most sincere and profound words for his lifelong friend, the one he had trusted above all others. One late afternoon in the quiet of the CEO office, Otis nervously opened the yellowed envelope. The familiar handwriting of Thomas appeared before her eyes, gentle, affectionate, but also filled with deep concern. Dear Otis, if you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer here to witness the immense challenges I had anticipated would come. But I have always believed that in the hardest moments, you would be the one to stand firm and protect what we built together. I'm sure you still remember those early days when we had nothing but our bare hands, but our hearts were full of ideals. I will never forget the late nights you stayed up with me as we designed our first product, or when we applied for a loan for the first time and were rejected time and again. simply because you were a black woman. Otis, it broke my heart to ask you to step back and accept the role of a janitor to protect Sterling Corporation from the harsh prejudices of the time. But I believed that one day you would step out of the shadows and claim what was rightfully yours, because Sterling Corporation was never just mine. It was ours. I have made it clear in my will that you are the official co-founder and the largest shareholder, but I also know that Ryan will never easily accept that. What I leave to you is not just shares or power, but the responsibility to protect the values we always believed in: integrity, transparency, and humanity. Dear Otis, never forget that you are never alone. I will always be with you in every difficult decision, in every moment when you feel most alone. Protect Sterling Corporation with your heart and your honor, as you have always done throughout the years we spent together. Your friend who has always believed in you, Thomas Sterling. Tears gently fell down Otis's face as she read those words. Beautiful yet bittersweet memories of her dear friend flooded back stronger than ever. Now, she understood even more clearly that the sacrifices and years of enduring prejudice and disdain were never in vain, for they had become the foundation for her to protect the true values that Thomas and she had painstakingly built. The next day, in a critical meeting with the entire leadership team and senior employees of Sterling Corp., Otis decided to publicly share Thomas's letter. In front of all the employees whose eyes were filled with emotion, she gently but resolutely held the letter, her voice trembling with emotion but full of determination. I want everyone to understand clearly that Sterling Corp is not only the legacy of Thomas Sterling, but it is also the place where I have dedicated my life to protect and build. What I do today is not for revenge or to reclaim power, but to fulfill Thomas's deepest wish: to create a company that is truly fair, transparent, and places human values above all else. The room fell into a respectful silence. Every eye was focused on the small woman standing before them, the one they had unknowingly or deliberately forgotten for so many years. Now, they truly understood that Otis was not just a CEO. She was the soul and true heart of Sterling Corporation. After Otis finished speaking, an elderly board member slowly stood up, his voice trembling with emotion. Otis, I apologize to you. For all these years, we allowed you to suffer injustices without anyone speaking up. Now, we all understand the true value you've protected throughout your life. You didn't just save the company, you saved the very soul and honor of Sterling Corp. His words were immediately met with strong support from everyone present. The employees who had long known Otis only as the old janitor now truly felt the enormous sacrifice she had silently endured. They understood that Sterling Corp was not just a business, but the spiritual legacy of two people who had faced countless prejudices and injustices to protect their noble ideals. From that moment on, the unity within Sterling Corp became stronger and more solid than ever before. Thomas's letter not only confirmed Otis's true role, but also awakened the hearts of everyone in the company. They vowed to protect and develop Sterling Corp according to the values that Thomas and Otis had spent their entire lives building. In the quiet office after the meeting, Otis sat alone, gazing out the window at the blue sky. She gently placed Thomas's letter in a frame, displaying it in the most prominent place in the CEO's office. In that moment, she felt Thomas's presence beside her, as a gentle but powerful reminder that she was never alone in this journey. She smiled softly, her heart lightened, knowing that the legacy of her beloved friend would now be protected and cherished forever, not only by her but by all those who believed in her and stood with her on the path ahead. Thomas's letter was not only an emotional testimony to the past, but also a driving force that helped Otis fully establish her position in front of employees, investors, and the public. From that moment on, Sterling Corporation truly entered a new chapter, where justice was not only asserted, but also realized through Otis's decisive and upright actions. While the company gradually regained stability and trust, another significant event was quietly but powerfully unfolding at the city courthouse: the final trial for Ryan Sterling and his accomplices. Ryan, once arrogant and powerful, now sat in the defendant's chair, his eyes empty and cold as they fixed on the handcuffs tightly binding his wrists. The usual arrogance was completely gone, replaced by helplessness in the face of irrefutable evidence. At the trial, the sharp evidence Otis and Jake had gathered that fateful night was presented clearly and persuasively before the judge. The financial fraud, data destruction, and the conspiracy to destroy Sterling Corporation were laid bare, leaving Ryan with no defense. When the judge read the official sentence, sentencing Ryan to 7 years in prison, the courtroom fell so silent that the ticking of the clock on the wall could be heard with each passing second. Ryan's eyes were filled with bitterness and anger, and he turned to look at Otis, who sat calmly in the witness stand. His gaze was full of hatred, but Otis did not look away. She met his stare with unwavering resolve, without hesitation or fear. She knew this was justice, simple and clear-cut. When the trial ended, Ryan was led away, his heavy footsteps growing fainter as he turned his head and spat his final bitter words at Otis. "You think you've won, Otis? You were just lucky. I won't forget this." But Otis simply responded softly, her voice calm and strong. "Ryan, I didn't win because of luck, but because the truth and justice are always stronger than lies and conspiracies." Ryan was escorted out, his footsteps growing distant, marking the complete end of a dark era for Sterling Corporation. In the months that followed, under Otis's wise and compassionate leadership, Sterling Corp made an extraordinary recovery. Not only did the company regain its reputation in the market, but it quickly became a symbol of transparency and human values in business. Revenue soared beyond expectations, and major investors returned, proud to partner with a company that had clear and steadfast ethical values. Sterling Corporation, under Otis's leadership, was no longer the company of one, but had become a family, where every individual was valued and their potential fully realized. Sterling Corp's employees, for the first time in many years, were truly happy and at peace. The human-centered policies Otis had introduced were not merely commitments, but were actively carried out, turning into everyday realities. Retirement funds were fully restored, welfare benefits improved, and career development training programs were implemented broadly, bringing new hope to those who had once thought they would be forgotten forever. Jake Wilson, the young assistant from years ago, had now become Otis's trusted friend and right-hand man, witnessing the miraculous revival of Sterling Corp. One day, Jake sincerely shared with Otis during an internal meeting, "Mrs. Carter, I've never seen the company so full of energy and positivity. The happiness in every employee is so obvious that it cannot be denied. I'm truly grateful to be alongside you on this extraordinary journey." Otis smiled gently in reply, "Jake, this isn't just my accomplishment, it's the result of unity, loyalty, and trust that we've all shared. Sterling Corp has bounced back because we chose the right path, no matter how difficult or challenging it was." Soon after, major newspapers began to write about Sterling Corp's remarkable story. The articles featured Otis on the front page, calling her the new icon of human-centered business, a clear testament that justice and ethics could triumph over even the most powerful forces. At the year-end celebration marking Sterling Corp's success, Otis stood before all employees and leaders, her voice full of emotion but also pride. "We've all been through the toughest moments. when it seemed like Sterling Corp couldn't survive. But today, we've proven that if we remain true to the truth, trust, and human values, nothing is impossible. The applause rang out loudly throughout the hall, no longer filled with doubt or hesitation. Everyone turned toward Otis with sincere gratitude. She, once invisible, now stood strong in the most deserving position, at the center of trust and hope. In that moment, Otis quietly looked up at the sky outside the large window, softly whispering to Thomas, her late friend. "Thomas, justice has been served. Our legacy is alive, and it will continue to live strong because I will never let the values we once believed in be forgotten again." And she knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, Sterling Corporation was now ready to face everything because the company had found its true strength from within. A strength rooted in trust, justice, and in the people who had always stood together through the most difficult times. As the final applause faded, Otis quietly looked out across the vast hall, her gaze gently sweeping over the familiar faces of those who had stood by her through the most difficult times of Sterling Corporation. After all the turmoil, Otis understood that justice had truly triumphed, but she knew this victory would only hold true meaning if it led to real change. A fairer, better future for all those who had always supported her. The very next day, during a major press conference attended by all employees and the media, Otis announced an important and groundbreaking decision, marking a historic turning point for Sterling Corporation. "I understand that Sterling Corp cannot exist without each and every one of you. This company thrives not because of any one individual, but because of the dedication and sacrifice of each worker, from the highest levels to the humblest positions. Therefore, today, I am pleased to announce that Sterling Corp will officially implement a stock-sharing program for all employees, regardless of their job titles or positions." Immediately, the hall erupted in applause, with every face lit up with joy and emotion. With this new policy, every employee became an official shareholder of Sterling Corporation. The dream of fairness that Otis and Thomas had envisioned years ago had now become a clear reality. Otis smiled gently and continued to announce another important decision, her voice calm yet stronger than ever. "And especially I want to express my deepest thanks to the cleaning and maintenance teams of the company. You are the ones who work tirelessly behind the scenes, often forgotten, yet in reality, you are the true heart and soul of Sterling Corp. From today, in addition to the stock shares, I have decided to significantly increase your benefits and wages, ensuring that no one in this company will ever feel invisible again." Tears of joy began to roll down the faces of the cleaning staff, who had never imagined they would one day be recognized and appreciated in this way. In that moment, they understood that Otis had not only transformed Sterling Corp, but had also changed their lives. But Otis didn't stop there. With eyes shining with passion, she announced the creation of a special education fund called the Sterling STEM Scholarship, a program designed specifically for the underprivileged women and people of color, helping them access education in the fields of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Otis looked at everyone, her voice filled with emotion. "Many years ago, I was a graduate engineer from Howard University, but I could not pursue my dreams simply because of my race and gender. I don't want anyone to suffer those same hardships again. The Sterling STEM Scholarship will be our way of opening the door for those who have been left behind by prejudice, giving them the opportunity to prove their true worth." This news immediately sent shockwaves through the media, receiving enthusiastic support from the community and even large investors. Sterling Corporation had now become not only a successful business but also a national symbol of fairness, diversity, and true equal opportunity. Sometime later, on a gentle late autumn afternoon, Otis slowly stepped out of her office, feeling the cool breeze brush against her face. She paused at the main entrance of Sterling Corp. And looked up at the large sign proudly displayed in front of the building. Her eyes welled up with emotion as she noticed a special change. Next to Thomas Sterling's name, for the first time in the company's history, her name appeared clearly, proudly. Founded by Thomas Sterling and Otis Carter, 1988. Otis's heart swelled. She thought of Thomas, her soulmate, who had stood by her through the tough early days, but who had passed before he could see justice finally done. She whispered softly, as if Thomas were standing right next to her. "Thomas, our names are together at last. Justice is complete, and our dream has now become a reality." Otis looked around and saw her employees leaving the company with smiles on their faces, walking lightly, proud. They greeted her with eyes full of gratitude and respect. In that moment, she truly felt it. She was no longer the invisible laborer, forgotten by society's prejudices. She had become a symbol of change, faith, and perseverance in the face of every challenge. As the evening sun slowly descended over the city, Otis turned once more to look at the company's sign. Her heart was filled with peace and happiness, knowing that her and Thomas's legacy would forever be etched in history, not just for business success but for the human values, fairness, and hope they had built together. She walked away gently, each step firm as she moved forward, knowing that though many challenges remained, Sterling Corporation and all those she loved were now ready to embrace the future with hearts full of trust and hope. And she, Otis Carter, the woman who had once been invisible to all, had now become a shining symbol of resilience, fairness, and the strength to overcome any prejudice. Because in the end, she had proven something very simple, yet profoundly deep. Even the most invisible people can achieve the most extraordinary things. The story of Otis Carter is a powerful reminder of the extraordinary strength hidden behind those often forgotten by society. Sometimes, the quietest individuals can bring about the greatest changes. So, in your daily life, have you ever stopped to recognize and appreciate the invisible people around you? If Otis's inspiring journey has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us spread more meaningful stories like this one.